Hello, everyone, and welcome to LDM Radio Sports Talk, the sports show that talks about sports and other topics relatable to sports fans. Joining me this week from a remote location is Harris Berger.
What's up, everybody?
All right. So my name is Alfonso Caldero, of course, and we are going to jump right in. Harris, did you hear the news about Tiger Woods?
I did. Very sad.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, unfortunately, he got into a single car crash earlier this week, and he's supposed to be conscious now, but he had sustained injuries to his legs. Do you have the details on it?
Yeah, compound leg fracture, and some other leg injuries. Had surgery on the leg. I believe this all unfolded yesterday. Or not yesterday, on Tuesday. Tuesday morning, driving to the golf course, it seemed like, for some kind of photo shoot, something of that nature. And the car rolled over several times and had to be taken out with the jaws of life. Our first responders were there to take him out safely, got him to the hospital. Went through surgery, was okay, came out of surgery okay, according to his agents and according to other sources. Just sad to see, man. This is the face of golf. He's been the face of golf probably for 20 years now. I mean, Tiger Woods is synonymous with the game at this point. And you look at the outpour of support for him on social media after this accident, from all over the sports world, not just golf. And you really see the effect that this guy's had. Just on Monday, he was playing golf with Dwayne Wade. He just gave the trophy to Max Homa at the Genesis Invitational the day before on Sunday. So just a wild, wild week, a freak accident. No, there weren't any underlying issues. He wasn't under the influence of any sort of drugs or alcohol. So that was a shining light, I guess, considering some of the issues that he's had in the past and some of the injuries he's had. It'll be interesting to see kind of where we go. Does Tiger Woods play golf again at a professional level? Is going to be the biggest question here. It remains to be seen how quickly this is going to recover. And he's already had ailing back issues on and off for the last couple of years. And what did this accident do to his back? Let alone the leg that they had to operate on. So it's going to be a long road to recovery at a guy who's at the tail end of his career age-wise. You have to think this might be it for him.
Yeah, unfortunately, because he is an older guy, so that is the older guy in sports terms. So that would definitely take into consideration. And to my understanding, this is not his first car crash, so it's just it's unfortunate, that it just keeps happening. And like in light of all the other instances that have happened, like with the Kobe Bryant and things like that, like news like this is just completely devastating. And hopefully he recovers to 100% and is able to play golf again. But at the very least, if he doesn't, at least be able to have like a regular older person's life, and enjoy all the hard work and the earnings that he's had, and then just have like a good life and not have to like be permanently injured from all of this.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the generation of professional golfers that are the biggest names and the top names in the world right now: the Dustin Johnsons, the Justin Thomases, the Jordan Spieths, Max Homa, who just won the Genesis Invitational. These are guys that got into golf because of Tiger. And however many countless others that have gotten into golf because of Tiger professionally, and have made a life because of what the path that Tiger's made. It's really interesting. You get to see the outpouring support that they've had for him, and just the sheer respect that people still have for Tiger Woods and the sport of golf because of that. Um, and how much of an impact that Tiger's had on those guys and the game of golf in general. Because if it had not been for Tiger, we might not have some of these great golfers that we have now.
Absolutely. So, we all send our well wishes to him, and hopefully he's able to fully recover. So, we're going to jump to a topic that is very big to New York sports fans this week. They've come out and MSG is going to open up 10% capacity for their fans for the New York Knicks and New York Rangers. And later on this month, they're going to open up for the Islanders. They're going to have like the 10% too. And then in March, New Jersey is going to follow suit, and they're going to open up 10% of for the currently it would be like the New Jersey Devils, and then heading towards the football season. So, what are your thoughts on that development?
I think it's awesome. I think that you really see the difference in some of the stadiums, and you watch around, especially hockey, you see the difference. You're able to see that a lot of these stadiums are doing things the right way. I know things are still scary. COVID is still very much a real topic in our world and still needs to be taken seriously. But I think that as the vaccines roll out and as we learn more about this disease, we can figure out how to still kind of maintain some sort of normalcy or get back to that thereof. And I think you look around in stadiums like the Panthers Stadium, you look in Carolina, and you see that they're really doing things the right way. Everyone is spaced out. They're not close to the teams at all. There's a big barrier. The seats are covered, so you can't even get down there. Everyone's wearing masks from what you can see. So I think as long as we do things the right way, we don't take advantage of it, I think this is a great step in the right direction. I think we're definitely going to have to get an LDM show down at MSG for a Knicks game or a Rangers game soon. Maybe take a little trip around the league and go out to New Jersey and go out to the island and see kind of where we fall. Maybe get to Brooklyn. We'll definitely have to play it by ear and see how things go. We'll definitely have to do that.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we can get into Brooklyn because the Nets are looking pretty top heavy there. It looks like they're finally making noise, but we'll get to that in a little bit. What I think the impact is, it's great for the arenas, obviously, because generating some kind of revenue is better than not generating any revenue. I think around the league, I've seen a lot of places that have been opened up to 25% capacity. Some of the named ones are like Dallas Cowboys in football and the Dallas Stars for the NHL. And there's different. The Arizona Coyotes are also have a full capacity, not full capacity, but it has like 25%. We saw what was the Super Bowl was like 30% or something like that, right?
Yeah, they allowed a lot of fans too that were vaccinated. They had vaccinated healthcare workers.
Yeah, so I think at this point we have more information on what we're dealing with now, and with the vaccinations and things like that, it is worth trying to get some fans in there and at least try to generate something, because like let's face it, the sports world is not going to be able to sustain what they've been doing the past calendar year. Yep. For very much longer. Like it's a great story to have these like seasons resume, and like these half seasons, and like playing with no fans and doing everything for the television. But at the end of the day, any business that loses, like the attendance is largely 35-40% of revenue sports wide. So any business that sustains those kinds of losses are gonna be impacted, and they're not gonna be able to sustain, for years to come. So, I think it's easy for sports fans to think that it's, like it's basically just millions getting thrown around. So it's very easy to lose sight that it's a huge deal. But to any scale, any business that loses like 40% is not going to be able to sustain.
Right.
So I think it's a great idea that it's happening, and it's great that they start with the 10% because, like if let's say like it's basically like a soft open, so they'll go in, they'll test the protocols and things like that because I mean it's very hard to run a large entity like that and then have like every single employee, every single person on board. Like there's these room for errors. There's also like let's be real. I mean, people that don't really care about their jobs 100%, they might like let stuff slide and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
having this like soft open is good, and then just moving on from there. So, how fast do you see this developing?
I think it depends on how we roll out with vaccines. I'm not a scientist, nor am I a politician, so I have no idea. All I know is I'm a fan of all of these sports. As long as I can go and sit at Citi Field and watch a baseball game in July, I'll be happy. And if I can go and watch a Bruins game and watch them beat up on the Rangers at MSG, then I'm happy. If they let me do it at full capacity, they let me do it at 10%, 12%, 80%. I don't care. As long as they start letting some fans and we start to be able to go back, then it is what it is. I don't really know what kind of timeline they're going to have on it. It's nice to see that things are starting, and I think that once you start to see these vaccines come out more and more, we'll start to be able to allow more and more to happen. So at least that's what I hope, and we'll see kind of where we go.
Yeah, I don't have all the details for it, but from what I'm understanding and what I'm hearing from my conversations with a couple of people who are attending these games, you have to get a COVID test relatively close to the time that you're supposed to, like the day that you're supposed to be there. So that's one way to curb it. But then they're only selling 3 games at a time, which presumably is to like to give time for the numbers to increase. Like let's say like after the 3 games, like everything works out good, maybe they'll move up to like 15% or 20%.
Right.
So it leaves that kind of leeway there. What I'm most concerned with is the secondary market because let's say like New York Rangers and New York Knicks games, like they were already expensive at full capacity. Like it's very hard to get into the building for under $100. So I can imagine what the secondary market would be if at only 10% capacity. Hopefully they're doing like they're making some kind of guidelines where people just won't be trying to get $400 a ticket just because it is only 10% capacity.
Yeah, and I think that I have done no research into this, so don't take my word for stone. But if they had any common sense, they would shut the secondary markets down because if you're buying a ticket, they're expecting you to be at the game, and you and your party. It should not be, hey, I'm buying this ticket and I'm selling it to Joe, and then Joe's going to come because we don't know what kind of contact tracing Joe's had.
Yeah.
Or if Joe's positive for COVID. So if his name's not on the ticket, he can't come in. So I think that would be kind of the smarter way to go about it. Like I said, I have no idea if that's what they're doing, but I think you're 100% right. And I think the problem is, especially in a market like New York with MSG, it's usually a who's who of celebrities at those games. And the fans usually are, because it's kind of like the Staples Center in LA, right? Is another big one where it's really like that's the place to be celebrity wise. And the real fans, the true blue, diehard, blue collar fans from those teams don't get to reap those benefits, right? Because of the way that those tickets are priced. And it's going to be interesting to see kind of what the Rangers and the Knicks do in order to accommodate that type of fan, as opposed to accommodate for the actor or actress or comedian, whoever's flying in that night and wants to come to the game. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how these franchises and how these how customer service is really handled. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different angles to this. I think some people are happy and they're jumping forward toward it. Me personally, like I've been to, let's say roughly 300, 400 games in my life, or something around those lines. I'm not exactly jumping, to the nearest, I'm not jumping through the nearest hoops to try to make this happen. I think it's good, for whoever wants to be there, and there'll be plenty of people who want to get this done. But I'm not 100% jumping, trying to get this, like be the first one at these games and things like that, because there are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of things that can possibly go wrong or not go exactly as planned. So I think, I'll be like in the last couple waves, like let a couple people go first and see how it is. And then, hey, it's fun. Maybe I'll go, but I think there's, though, as far as like celebrities and things like that go, I think that would be kind of the same thing. I don't think everybody who, let's face it, was 18,000 fans at MSG, the capacity. So, you're gonna get like probably like about 2,000 fans going in there. So, there'll be plenty of people that want to go, but I don't think everybody who is an actual fan and would regularly go to games is jumping to try to go right now.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, but I also think that I know I'm kind of in the same boat you are. I'm gonna kind of give this. They're starting this weekend. I think Sunday is the first game at MSG. They're allowing fans. I'm gonna give it a couple weeks, maybe a couple months. We'll see kind of how I don't want to wait too long because then the season's gonna be over, right? Yeah. Before we know it, and it's gonna come playoff time, and then forget about it. If the Rangers even make the playoffs, we'll get into that later in the show, I'm sure. But we might not be able to get there, Yeah. So, especially price wise. So, yeah, I think you're 100% right, but I think that it's just with the name and the essence and the ambiance of Madison Square Garden, and the type of fan that it's attracted in the past, it's going to be interesting to see kind of the way people react to it and how they're if they get priced out. I know if it's the way that we are thinking it's going to go, you and I can't afford to go.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see kind of the way it goes and how we move forward with this.
Yeah, no. I was talking to a good friend in Tampa who her father is a security guard at like pretty much every sporting event in Tampa, and the way Tampa's doing it is they're basically doing a lottery with their season ticket holders. And, like they assign different people different games. And if they can't make the game, they can't sell it. They have to basically like forfeit their right for the game that was assigned to them. And then they basically get like a different game in the pool. And they do it that way. And if you were to sell your tickets on the secondary market, then you would be like suspended from being a season ticket holder. Like they're really just trying to get everybody in, which I think it's a super smart idea. I haven't heard anything from the New York side of it on how they've handled it that way, but hopefully it's something similar to that, or at least like just not reward the people who are lucky enough to get tickets and then just want to like pretty much double and triple their money and take advantage of people who just want to go to games.
Yeah.
All right, so we are going to move on. So I have a fun topic I want to discuss. I want to get it out now, just so we don't run out of show and we're not able to get to this topic. So I was I always go through the internet airways, and I have a Facebook hockey group called NHL Talk. So a lot of different topics come and go, and one of them is I wanted to get your take on this. Being a fan of multiple teams, what is your stance on that?
Who am I to say you can't root for somebody? And I'm not the guy to ask on this subject because I don't follow traditional quote unquote party lines, right? I've said vocally on the show I'm a Bruins fan. I will always root for the Bruins. That is there's no question on that, right? But because of my ties, youth hockey and up, to a lot of guys that play around the league, I don't necessarily root for teams, but I root for players, and therefore I root for that team, right? to be successful. And sometimes it's good for the game if other teams are good, right? For example, I don't hate. There's teams in the league that people say you should hate because you like a certain team, right? I.e., Bruins fans should not like Flyers fans. Or I don't like Flyers fans. I should hate the Flyers, right? Or I should hate the Rangers, or I should, you get those kinds of rivalries.
Right.
And you really shouldn't like the teams. I get it, but I like Kevin Hayes, and I grew up with Shane Gostisbehere, and I like Carter Hart, and I want those guys to do well. So when I watch them play, I root for the team. I don't hate the Rangers the way that I should hate the Rangers, the way that my friends who are Rangers fans talk trash to me about the Bruins. I don't hate. It's the same thing. I don't know. It might be because I'm a little spoiled when it comes to sports and how successful Boston has been during my lifetime when it comes to sports, not just in hockey. But I can understand why some people like certain teams and why people like multiple teams, right? You grew up in a certain place and then you move, right? For example, I grew up in South Florida with the Panthers, and I grew up a Panthers fan. But when I spent the majority of my childhood traveling back and forth to Boston and going to Bruins games, and I became a Bruins fan, and that's where all of my Boston ties came to. But then after I finished college, I moved to Tampa. And I started going to Lightning games, and I became a Lightning fan. So it depends on kind of where you go and the way life takes you. And I know guys that have grown up in Victoria, British Columbia, and now they live in Texas. And they went from being Vancouver fans, they root for Vancouver, but they also root for the Stars. So it's all relevant. I think there's excuses. I guess you can call them excuses, but I guess I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it actually grows the game more because you want to get in and you want to watch all of these different teams, and you're not like, oh, the Rangers aren't playing today, I'm not going to bother to watch any hockey just because the Rangers aren't playing, or you don't have a stake in the game. And then we can get into the gambling aspect. If the more and more that gambling becomes more mainstream in our country and in Canada, the more and more you're going to start rooting for other teams. You start gambling on the Kings to win. You start gambling on the Canadians to win. You're going to root for those teams. So, and the more and more money you make on those teams, you might start to become a fan of those teams, and you might start to gamble on them more and more. And then you start buying merch, and you start buying jerseys, and you start to buy into all this stuff
with the money they've made for you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, I don't think there's a problem with it. I'm in the same group with you on Facebook, so I see kind of where that conversation went. I don't hate it, man. You want to be a fan of the game. I'm a fan of the game when it comes down to it, when it's all said and done. I root for the Bruins, and I root for Vegas, and I root for my friends around the league. I don't necessarily root just because it's a city team. I obviously have my ties to Boston, where I grew up, spent a lot of time growing up in and around Boston and in the Northeast, so I have my ties there. And Bobby Orr was my favorite player ever, so I root for the Bruins because of Bobby Orr, Ray Bourque, right? So people have all these, but I also have friends. Gordie Howe was their favorite player, so they're Red Wings fans, or Stevie Y, right? Or my buddy, biggest Patrick Waugh fan is a Colorado Avalanche fan. So it just, I don't hate it, man. You want to be a fan, be a fan. Be a fan of the game, though. You know what I mean? Don't just root for teams and root for be a fan of the game and grow the game. Us talking about this right now is promoting the game, right? So I think that's the way that people should think about it. It shouldn't be like, oh, you're a bandwagoner because you root for 3 teams, right? Yeah, I root for a couple teams, but I have my party allegiances to one, and then after it comes the other. I'll give you a good example, and then I'll let you jump in. When I was living in Tampa, lived in Tampa for 4 years after I finished college. The Bruins played the Lightning in the playoffs. I went to games as a Bruins fan. I did not go as a Lightning fan. But the year before, the Lightning were in the playoffs against the Islanders, and I went to playoff games with Lightning gear on. So it's because that's where I'm living. I've become fully immersed into that system. And yeah, I'm going to join that party lines while I'm living there, right? So I'm going to support my local team because at the end of the day, who doesn't want one of those boat parades? Because those are just awesome.
All right, so I when I was growing up, I was always like, you just one team and that's it. Like everybody else sucks. So with that kind of ideal, when I moved to Boston, I lived in Boston for 4 years, from 2010 to 2014. I understood where most fans come from, and I like it. Pretty much broadened my horizon when it comes to different fans and learning about different fans and things like that. What you're saying, I understand with living situations and kind of bending towards some teams. For me personally, I couldn't really do that being from New York and then living in Boston, but
Yeah, that's a little tougher, right?
yeah, so like
New
I'd
York and
say,
Boston's always had that historic rivalry, not just in hockey or in baseball. It's amassed all of sports. So that's a
yeah,
tougher one. I get
yeah.
that.
So like basically, it was like kind of like the Bruins. I guess I kind of bent a little bit. I mean, especially since I lived there when they won the cup in 2011. So that was kind of cool. But I think the problem with liking multiple teams is that you have that one euphoria feeling when your team wins the championship, whether it be like the Stanley Cup or the Lombardi Trophy or any sport. Your team winning is like that gives you the super euphoric, like yeah, like you're just basically you're super happy and
We're the fan.
you
The
want to buy
fan.
a bunch of merchandise and
Yeah.
like you're basically like this is like what you've always waited for and things like that, and some people have never experienced it. Now when you like multiple teams, you're basically trying to feel that feeling, like even if your team goes down, like basically like I'm a Ranger fan and then like I'll be like a side Lightning fan. So it's like, oh, the Rangers are out. So like the Lightning, they're in now, and then like the Lightning end up winning the Stanley Cup.
Interesting
And
choice
like,
of teams you just picked.
huh?
I said interesting choice of teams you just picked, considering the Lightning are basically the Rangers in Florida.
They used to be. I mean, now they only have like one ex-Ranger on the team, so it's not.
Two.
It's a mute point. They had at one point they had like 5 ex-Rangers, but that was like a couple years ago. But
Yeah.
even at this point, it's like a lot
Just
of
an interesting. Just had to point out
well
your
the
your
Lightning,
choice of team.
yeah,
To pick
the Lightning just won the last Stanley Cup, so basically it was like like you're basically like the Rangers are out of it, so you like jumped on the bandwagon of somebody else's Stanley Cup ride, and then you like when they won, it's like you felt that euphoria moment, even though like that's not even the team that you were originally going for. So I think
I
that's
think you
that's the
don't. I don't
main
think you necessarily get that
that is the main
same
problem.
feeling. You know what I'm
I think,
saying?
but
Like a
I
couple
think
years ago,
there's some
like when
people that
Vegas
do.
came into the league, a lot of people said, "I like Vegas." Like the way that Vegas went about their business, right? Um, it was just fun to watch them play and how they played, and there was just this group, quote unquote, the group of misfits, right? That they used that mantra all season long, and everyone counted them out, and a lot of people became fans of Vegas that way. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in Seattle next year or 2 years when they jump in the league, but when Vegas went on their run, I was rooting for Vegas. But if they had played the Bruins in the finals, I'm rooting for the Bruins. And if Vegas won the cup, I wouldn't have had the same feeling when the Bruins won the cup. I think that people support different teams, but I think that you have that everyone always has that one team that their their allegiance is strictly to that team. And then I think you kind of have some fans of other teams, right?
Right, but I think that's the main problem and that's the main issue when it comes to other fans and the whole bandwagon ideal is that you're basically just trying to replicate that feeling even when it's not like your team. And then like for the one people that just like the one team and only one team in that sport, they basically look at these people as a laughing stock because it's like, why are you're just basically riding everybody's coattails just to get that euphoric feeling of winning a championship and like have the ultimate fun of it. And I think that's basically the main drawback of it. I think a lot of it, when it comes to like liking different teams or being able to watch different games, liking the sport is one thing, but when you go through like this total extent of like you wouldn't even know this person is a Red Wings fan, but like they're just draped in Lightning stuff for like the past 2-3 years or whatever. Like those kind of situations, that's where it gets murky, and that's where a lot of the like that's where it loses its validity when it comes to like different sports fans. Does that make sense or no?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, people are always going to disagree with one another on stuff like this. I think that um, I know that when I root for another team, it's not because I'm looking for that euphoric feeling. It's because I genuinely want to see that team succeed, not for my own sake, but mainly for the sake of some of the players on those teams, for the city that team belongs to, things like that. I don't look for it for the feeling for myself.
But think about this though. So like if you have one favorite team out of like 30 teams, so like the percentages are a lot less than if you have three favorite teams out of 30 teams, and then like if one of them hits, then it's like you're basically improving your chances on like having that super euphoric like grand moment when it's like if for the people that just stick to
Yeah,
that
but
one
I'm not
team,
looking
like,
for that euphoric grand moment with these other
I'm
teams.
not saying you per se, but I'm saying people in
No,
general.
and
There's a
that's
lot
what
of
I'm saying. I
people.
get where you're
There's a
coming
lot of
from,
people
right?
who go for that because that's why they have like all these different favorite teams, because they just basically want to like ride the wave and hopefully one of them hits. You know what I mean? Like it just improves their chances on a team that they like winning the Stanley Cup kind of thing, or any other sport really. I think a lot of it happens in basketball because you have like people who are like player fans, so like a LeBron James fan, so they went like to Cleveland and then they went to Miami and then they went back to Cleveland being fans. You know what I mean? It just gets ridiculous at that point. I think basketball is like the biggest offender when it comes to like these kind of like, loving like six favorite teams and hoping somebody hits.
Well, right. I think you have to look at it from different aspects when it comes to that, right? So I said from the beginning, one of the things I mentioned was I don't am rooting for other teams, is I like to root for people. For example, biggest example is this past Super Bowl. I was never a Buccaneers fan growing up. When I lived in Tampa, I went to Bucks games. I never was a Buccaneers fan, right? But I grew up with Tom Brady. Tom Brady goes down there. I don't like the Chiefs per se. We'll see kind of what happens there. That's another story for another day. But I was rooting for the Bucks in the Super Bowl because of Tom Brady, right? And I was rooting for the Bucks all season because of Tom Brady, because of Gronk. So from that aspect, I understand, especially basketball. You're 100% right. Basketball is the biggest offender when it comes to people jumping ship, because people follow players. And it's because basketball is a player-driven league. It's not a team-driven league anymore. It's always player-driven. The biggest example is LeBron James for sure, because he's been to so many different teams, right? And then you saw the allegiances when James Harden left OKC to go to Houston, and then from Houston to Brooklyn. And then the same thing with KD when KD left OKC and went to Golden State, and then from Golden State to Brooklyn. So you see the way that things go, right, and how people change allegiances. But I think that your opinion comes because you grew up in this city, in New York, and I think that people that grew up in those towns that have those blood, like bleed blue, bleed pinstripes type of fans, bleed green type of fans, where when you live in Arizona, you don't really have that, right? You never grew up with that kind of diehard fan base where you never, like, you might, if you're our age, the Coyotes weren't always there, right? So things changed over there. The Cardinals were there, sure, but they were never relevant, right? They went to one Super Bowl and lost to the Steelers. Where if you live in states like New York or in Massachusetts or Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Michigan, I think you have those bleed red, bleed Steeler black, everything, bleed black and gold type of mentalities where you don't root for other teams and you don't like people who do. Whereas I grew up in a smaller town where I didn't have that in-your-face type of mentality when it came to sports and their fans. Especially I grew up in a town that was a lot of immigrants from, or a lot of transplants from New York or from Pennsylvania, and you see kind of the melting pot of fans that the South has where they might not have those allegiances.
Yeah,
So
that's probably
that's kind of get those type of fans that kind of like to root for more than one spot. They root for where they grew up, and then they root for where they came from. They root for a certain player that they grew up liking, or they root for a certain city that they just enjoyed the atmosphere. So I think that's kind of where you get the different takes.
It's an interesting point that you bring up because I think New York is kind of like the weird part when it comes to, because like every sport has two different teams in it. So it's like, in a classroom, you can like be talking sports with your buddies, and there'll be like a split between like Yankees and Mets, and
But
now
where does
the
the
Knicks and the
allegiance
Nets.
come from?
But if like in pretty much every other part of the country that has these groups, like let's say Boston, for instance, everybody's basically loving just one team of every sport. So they like it's more of like a us versus them kind of thing. And like where you're from, and I think it would be harder to have like these different favorite teams or like dual favorite teams in the areas that have like just one team, like Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has one team in every sport aside from basketball. But they don't have a basketball team at all. But like these other different areas, like Detroit. Detroit has the representative of all sports. So it's kind of hard just to like a different team being from Detroit. Classically, there'll be other people who like they'll be from Detroit and then they'll hate the fact that the Lions have sucked for their whole life if they were 30. So that they just end up liking the Packers because the Packers are like down the street in relativity. And
Well, that's an
like
extreme.
the Packers, but
They're not going to the Packers.
I think I think there's a lot of people who do that. There's a lot of people like from Chicago who like they've been like if they weren't alive in 1985 or if they were just a kid in 1985, so like they've never known the Bears to be all that good, so they like the Packers because the Packers like they had that run with Brett Favre and things like that, so they became Packers fans. I think there's a lot of that like in a deeper element. But basics is just having the like rooting for your hometown team, and then but in the smaller areas where there's only one sport, well, there's only one team per sport in that area. Everybody's pretty much going toward that one, and then if you like a different team from there, then you're weird. Like but in New York, there's two teams in every sport, so it's like hard to like have that.
But
same
in a town as high profile as New York, right? Where does your team alliances usually come from?
I think.
Where do they come from?
Well, it comes from
how do you learn to love that team?
It would be the upbringing or whoever brought you around the sport or whatever you were able to catch on your own.
Family, parents, something like that, right?
Yeah, for the most part,
those lineages are passed down. Where that's when things like guys from Florida, where I grew up, that's where those things change, right? Because I know a couple of buddies I have that their parents grew up in New York. They grew up in Florida. Those party allegiances, team allegiances were passed down to them hereditarily. Is that a word? Who knows?
Close
passed
enough.
Down from their parents to them where they become Mets, Jets, and Knicks fans, right? But they live in Miami. They live in Florida. Now you're not going to be a Dolphins fan. That's not going to fly in a New York fan's house, right? But he's a Panthers fan. He sometimes roots for the Heat, but very rarely will because that's still a rivalry kind of with the Knicks too. But that might be a little bad of an example, but sometimes those work where you get more than one allegiance to a fan base because one, your parents give one to you. And then two, it's where you grew up, and then now you're a fan of that team. Now, I don't think you're going to be rooting for a rival. Like I'm not going to be like I didn't move to New York and start rooting for New York teams. I won't go to a Rangers game and root for the Rangers. Right. I won't go. The Islanders are different because the Islanders have always been little brother to the NHL, to the league for the time we've been growing up. So it really hasn't been that bad. And who doesn't love to do that yes, yes, yes chant after they score goals? But I'm not going to go to a Yankees game and root for the Yankees. That's not going to happen, right? So my team allegiances come from there, but it's not necessarily where I grew up. Tampa's a different story because Tampa never had any real rivalries with Boston. So all my team alliances, except the Rays, I won't root for the Rays. I'll go to the Rays games and root for pretty much anyone else, except the Yankees. So, and I won't go to those games regardless. But I think that's kind of the other side of the coin where you have the people, the diehards from those cities, in those cities that only grew up with one, where you might be a diehard from another city that you also root for your city, right? And you root for that other team. So if you live in Texas and you're a Detroit Red Wings fan, you might also root for the Stars. Maybe not this year because they're in the same division, but those might change. You know what I mean?
I think Florida.
Like I don't think I'm not.
Florida
rooting
is
for
a weird.
teams
I
and
mean,
I'm rooting
Florida's
for
like one of those
rivals.
in between states. I mean, there's some areas that fall in line with the in between states, like California. Any place in California, you know, for a large majority for the NFL, they've had so many ins and outs with some of these teams where it's just like you're basically like a free agent. Like if you're living in California and you're an NFL fan, you can like whoever you want because all these teams have come and gone. You're basically just a free agent. That's the way I look at it. There's some places that don't
There's more
fall
college
in line
allegiances in
with these
California than there
classic,
are NFL.
yeah, these classic ideals like a Pittsburgh, like a Detroit, like
Right.
St. Louis. Like where they only have like one team in every sport, and
Right.
there's not a lot of those areas. Basically, if you should just like your favorite team, like whoever you grew up watching, and that's it. But I think circling back to the original point that we had is that some people they have the one base team, and then they add on these other teams trying to get like let's say like if you're living in Tampa, right? So you bring up Florida. So you're living in Tampa and you're not from Tampa at all. But
Right.
now the Bucks are winning, and now you're wearing like a bunch of Bucks stuff, and like you celebrated the Super Bowl like it was your team and stuff like that. That's the problem, and that's where people they end up murking the lines.
Yeah, but why? To be honest with you, that's why I said this is. I'm not one to ask this because I don't care. You want to root for the Bucks because they're good. Root for the Bucks because they're good. That's on you. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, I'm not. I don't care who you root for because I care who I root for. If I decide I want to root for the Bucks and the Patriots, that's what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? So, like, but I'm not going. But it's also I live there, so if I live there, I'm going to support that team. That's where it comes back to. I have the allegiances to where I grew up, and then now I have allegiances to where I live. So the only exception is if it's a rivalry, right? So I'm not moving to New York and starting to root for the Jets. The Jets, other bad example, because I have gone to Jets games or I have rooted for the Bills in the past because the Bills and the Jets have been little brothers to my team for my entire life, where I don't care what they do anymore because I'm jaded because they've been so successful and the other teams have not. So I like to see them do good. It's that underdog mentality.
Right.
So that's what some people like to see. I think that I'm not going out, like I'm not buying Bucks championship gear, but I root for the Bucks in the Super Bowl. But that's me, right? Some people do that.
Yeah.
Some people
But I think
people
it's just
were Patriots fans and then bought Bucks gear but they live in Tampa, right? So you want to support your local teams because again, at the end of the day, those local teams that you're supporting, because one, parades are fun. Winning championships in your city's fun. It brings attention to your town. Two, those big teams, big market teams like that, give back to the community. And who doesn't want to see that?
right. I think there's a lot of pros and cons and things like that. But basically, long story short, is you're increasing your chances of like feeling that your team's like won and like having that ultimate fun and all that. But basically, if you just like one team and one team is like your favorite team and there's nobody else that could even come close to that one team winning or being successful and having like a deep playoff run and ultimately a championship, those are the ones that you feel the most. And there's some people who just want to improve their chances of feeling that moment through multiple teams. and that's
I
where
mean, look,
it
if you
rubs
grew
some
up a
people the
Detroit
wrong way.
Lions fan and you decide wake up one morning and say, "Hey, I want to root for the Packers because they win," I don't blame you. Who doesn't want to feel that euphoric moment, right? Yeah, I get it. Like, fine. But on the other side of the coin, too, if my team's out, why can't I latch my allegiance onto somebody so that I have a horse in the race? It makes it more fun for me to watch the games. You know what I'm saying? It's the same thing as gambling. Gambling is another aspect. When you gamble on a team, you're going to root for that team, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, nothing. It's a whole different. I mean, gambling on it is so
But
different.
it's not.
It's not
It's
as
not.
apples and oranges
Not
because
gambling
you're
with money.
obviously
You're
you want them
gambling
to
with
win
your own.
because
If let's say I invested heavily into the Bucks, right? Forget Tom Brady, forget Gronk, forget everything else. Let's just say last year I decided to say, "Hey, I'm going to be a Patriots fan, but because Tom Brady's gone, I'm just not going to root for them that hard. I'm going to root for the Bucks instead, or I'm going to root for both teams equally, right?" And if the Bucks go to the Super Bowl and lost, and then I feel that same sadness, right? That would have happened with the Patriots losing. So it just you're latching your feelings onto, and you're latching your emotions onto another team. Yeah, to get that euphoric moment, because who doesn't love that? But at the same time, it makes it more interesting to watch the game. Makes it more interesting to be around, to just talk about, to have a horse in the race, right? That's what everybody wants at the end of the day. Whether your team's good or not is another thing. And then if you latch your allegiances on somewhere else, then you have that extra shot. Who am I to say that you can't do that?
I think I agree, and that's why I feel like I respect it more. I'm not like as super hard stance about it for myself. I mean, I'll watch a game. There's some teams that like I hate less than others, but there's no satisfaction I'll ever get from any of those teams the same way that I get from the one team myself. Like, all right, so case in point, when a couple years ago when the Washington Nationals beat the Houston Astros, I was super on the Washington Nationals because
Right.
I dislike the Houston Astros so much. Like, I basically jumped on their bandwagon for that week, whatever it was, and it was great, whatever, and that was it. But at the end of the day, like, I didn't have the same kind of euphoria, and I don't even know what they've done since. Like, I haven't kept up with them at all. I think they were like middle of the pack last year in the standings. But like, there's no other moment that I'll have that would be as good as my team, which is the New York Yankees, winning the championship. But I think there's some people who like latch on to different teams, and they like they do like these 3 or 4 teams, these multiple teams to like feel that euphoric moment every single time. And I think it's cheap.
I think that your situation is the majority of situations. I think that, and it might just be for a longer period of time, right? So, for example, I'm not following the Bruins and Vegas equally. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm heavily invested in the Bruins. I'm not heavily invested in Vegas. I'll root for Vegas if I watch them. I'll root for the Flyers if I watch them because I like Kevin Hayes and Shane. But I'm not looking at, and I'm not riding or dying by what they do. You know what I mean? And the same thing with the Bucks. Football's tough because there's only 16 games, right? So you pretty much catch them every week. But I'm not tuning in every night to see what Vegas is doing. I'm not tuning in every night to see what the Flyers or what Dallas or Tampa. I'm not tuning in to see what they do every night. But I'm tuning in to see what the Bruins do every night. You know what I mean? And then when it comes to playoff time, if the Bruins get knocked out, I'm not going to say, "Hey, Bruins suck. I'm going to jump over here." That's not what I do. Then I become, all right, let's go. I'm all in with Tampa. But if they played each other, forget about it. I'm a Bruins fan. That's where we sit, right? Same thing. I did the same thing you did with Houston. I hate Houston. Wanted Washington to win that World Series. But I wasn't like, wasn't following Washington all year long. But I think that some people might do that. But I think the majority of people are the way you think. I don't think they're heavily invested in 3 or 4 teams. I think at the most you might have 2 or 3 because, like I said, you have the party allegiance, the team allegiances you grew up that were passed down to you, hopefully from a parent. Hopefully they were passed down to you, or they were grown upon you from where you lived, and then you moved somewhere, and now your party allegiance is also there. So I think then you follow both teams equally. When I lived in Tampa, I was heavily invested in the Lightning and the Bruins. But now that I'm here, I don't follow the Lightning nearly as close as I did when I lived there.
Yeah, I think being like I hear a lot of being a New York Jets fan, I hear like
I think
I don't
you
know
get
how you
jaded
could
living here
I don't know
because
how you could be
sports
a New
fans
York
here are
Jets fan.
so diehard.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of like diluted here. Like what you're saying, like everybody's
But I don't
diehard, but
think so. I don't think it is as diluted as you
there's
think
different
because even
options to
though you
pick
have
from.
multiple choices, right?
Yeah,
You have those strict party lines and you don't cross them.
yeah.
Whereas nobody grows up a diehard Panthers fan. That otherwise they'd sell the building out every night. Same thing in Arizona, right? They don't grow up diehard Yotes fans. They don't grow up. You know what I mean?
Well, I think
So
that has something to do with winning, and like if they were like, let's say if
I
the
know the
Coyotes,
Rangers, the Jets haven't won since the '90s and the
right,
'80s.
right, but if let's say like if the Coyotes win like 3 out of the next 4 Stanley Cup championships, then obviously there's gonna be like a ton of Coyotes fans now, and it's gonna be like the greatest fan base in the world, and that's just the way it
I
goes.
still don't think so. I think you'll have more people support them, but I don't think so.
I think
Because you got a lot of people jump on that Vegas bandwagon, and I think you still have the same people that jumped on Vegas, even if they were bad.
I think
Because it's new.
winning has a lot to do with these cases when it comes to who's being a favorite team, like a
Yeah,
favorite
then the
fan.
Lions wouldn't
You
have
know who
fans.
I think if like let's say like a New England like Patriots fan, like somebody from Boston, if they were a Patriots fan, like the Patriots have pretty much scratched every fan's itch when it comes to like winning and such like that. So you basically don't need to have like 2 favorite teams or 3 favorite teams, but it comes from like the deprived fan bases, like the New York Jets, like the Detroit Lions, the Cleveland Browns, and all these other places where you get like these 2 or 3. And that's why like you see in basketball, there's so many like people who follow 2 or 3 or 4 favorite teams because the Knicks are so bad and the
See, but I
Nets
don't
are
think that
just
I don't think that those teams, like the people that root for multiple teams, aren't looking for that euphoric feeling that you keep talking about. They're rooting for players, right? It's a lot different when you're rooting for players as opposed to teams.
I don't know. I think when you've liked a crappy fan base not a crappy fan base, a crappy team performance wise for so long, it's like you want to feel that. So it's like, oh, I'm gonna kind of like try to like this team because the Jets, like the Jets aren't gonna be all that great anytime soon. So let me just like start liking the Seahawks or something like that, so that they start like knowing what like a deep playoff run in January is and things like that. Like the Jets haven't had that in 10 years. And,
And,
if you look at it on paper, they're not going to have it for like at least another 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe.
but what's
So,
wrong with that?
yeah. So, I mean, I think some people latch on to, to have that like feeling of wanting to like,
Who wants to get kicked
wanting
in
to
the
be on the
stomach
winning side
every
because
year?
people, at the end of the day, like people will want to be like on the winning side. They want to like root for winners. They don't want to root for
I'll tell you
losers
what.
and things like that. And it's easier to just jump from team to team to team, or have like 2 dogs in the race instead of 1, or 3 dogs in the race instead of 1.
I'll tell you what. Jets fans are the most self-deprecating fans I know on this planet. Who wants to get kicked in the stomach every year by that franchise when you can root for that franchise at the start of every year when everybody has the same record and it's 0-0 and we have the same record? Or if you drop a game, hey, we're still in it, we're all right. You get to 0-6, then we got a little bit of a problem. Then hey, this guy I really like, I'm gonna root for him. You know what I mean?
Well, I
Why
think
not? You know,
basically
because who wants to get kicked in the stomach, kicked in the sack over and over again, and have to go through that and bang your head against the wall, and when you finally get that winner for your city, that's different, right? You have that different feeling of euphoria. Look at the Browns. The Browns had beer locked in cages with chains before unless they got a win. Now they're making the playoffs. They're probably going to win the division next year. But those Cleveland Browns fans didn't just stay Cleveland Browns fans. I guarantee you. They're not going to go and root for the Steelers, but they're probably going to say, hey, Jamie Collins went from the Browns to the Patriots. I'm going to root for him. Or, hey, they went here. I'm going to root for that team. I guarantee you that happens. That happens more often than you think because people don't like to be kicked in the sack over and over and over and over again without having that payoff. Once the Jets finally figure it out and they get a winner, God knows when that'll be. Probably not in my lifetime or yours, but we'll see kind of how it goes. But that's when you'll have that bigger euphoria, right? When the Bruins won the Cup in 2011, I was 18 years old, and that was awesome to watch. When the Red Sox won it in 2004, I was 11, and that was awesome. When the Red Sox won in 2013, that was awesome. But again, I'm a big Patrick Kane fan. When the Hawks won the Cup, I didn't have the same feeling as when the Bruins won the Cup. And then when the Bruins played the Cup and played the Hawks in the final, I wasn't happy when the Hawks won. So you know what I mean? So it's I get where you're coming from, and I think it's because of how you grew up. We grew up differently. And in New York, it's so hard to cross those team lines, even though you have more than one team to root for in all the different major sports, right? You're not going to grow up in New York City and be a Bills fan. That doesn't happen. So, and you're never going to root for the Bills because the Jets hate the Bills and the Bills hate the Jets. And then you're not going to be a Patriots fan or a Dolphins fan. You know what I mean? Those are rivalry lines. But you don't want to keep getting kicked while you're down and not have any payoff when you can just say, "Hey, I'm going to support this team." But when the Jets finally do figure it out, I'm going to be super duper happy that happens. There you go. Yeah, I said super duper. That's exactly what just happened.
Loyalty means a lot, and when
exactly,
there'll be
some people want that euphoric feeling because who doesn't? Who doesn't want to win every now and again?
Absolutely.
You can't just lose over and over and over again.
So we're gonna have to carry this over to another show sometime. But that does it for our show for this week. Thank you very much, Harris Berger, for joining us in his cat cave over there.
Thanks, guys.
All right, my name is Alfonso Caldero. We'll see you next week. LDM Radio Sports Talk.